Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers about their work and the writing process and the publishing and editing and writing industry. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. You can subscribe to either or preferably to both, so you never miss a thing. And I'm gonna come back to that later too, and remind you, please, once again, do hit subscribe, do hit a nice review if you can. It does help people find the show, and they're going to want to find the show because of folks like my guest today, who is the author of 3 comedic mystery novels, some of my favorite stuff, starring one of the most original characters that I have encountered in recent years, and that would be the former pro wrestler turned private eye, Jed Hammerhead Ounstead. And AJ, please correct me if I got that wrong. I met him recently I met AJ, not Hammerhead, recently at the Left Coast Crime Conference in Tucson. And I was taken by a few things. One, he's a really engaging guy with a knack for coming up with some really cool promotional swag, which is a really big deal in this day and age. And more important than that, of course, he's a very funny, very talented writer. And he's joining me today from his home in British Columbia. Please welcome AJ Devlin to the open mic. AJ, it's great to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Well, for those who might not be familiar with your work, give us the 411 about the series and your main character, who I noted, Hammerhead Ounstead.
Yes. Hammerhead Jed Ounstead, he's a former former pro wrestler turned PI in Vancouver. And he earned the nickname Hammerhead because back in the day when he was wrestling, he would walk to the ring with a 2x4 piece of wood. And then after winning a match, he would celebrate by drinking a beer and then breaking the wood over his head. So real highbrow stuff we have going on here with the whole Hammerhead's gimmick. But yeah, so then he lives in Vancouver. His dad's a retired Vancouver police officer who has his own private investigation firm, and then he has a sort of a sidekick cousin who's a former IRA operative who's now a bartender. And in the first book, Cobra Clutch, he's Hammerhead Jed, sort of washed out of wrestling. He's kicking around Vancouver as a bouncer, and one of the mini mysteries in the book is sort of why did he leave wrestling. And that's addressed, and then his former tag team partner, who still wrestles locally, wrestles with a pet snake, and someone kidnaps the snake and holds it for ransom. So that's the kickoff for the debut, a good old snake napping gone wrong in Vancouver. And then the second book in the series, Rolling Thunder, is the follow-up. Takes place about 6 months later. Hammerhead Jed's now a fully fledged PI working with his dad, and he's hired by a former wrestling contact who's now a roller derby star. And he catches a case that brings him into the world of women's flat track roller derby, which is a very colorful, very vibrant world that he's sort of uniquely prepared for in some ways, and in some ways not. And during the course of his investigation, he encounters a lot of interesting avenues, including coming across the world of high stakes wiener dog racing in Vancouver, which is a real thing. At Hastings Racecourse. And then the third book, 5 Moves of Doom, that's the most recent. And that one's sort of a mashup of pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. And Hammerhead Jed's hired by a former UFC fighter to find a missing championship belt. And as he sort of descends and investigates in the world of an underground fight club, he encounters different shady characters, and some eccentric yoga enthusiast. There's a little bit of goat yoga in the book. He encounters some bodybuilders and some gamblers, and it's sort of he kind of gets all around Vancouver in the third one, and it's definitely his toughest case yet. And it was fun to sort of it's fun to take him into sort of these fringe subcultures and these sort of maybe alternative sports or maybe not so mainstream sports. Although MMA itself is pretty huge, which is why in the book I definitely tried to take it back to more of the street level origins of fight clubs and mixed martial arts.
Well, yeah, and I love the setting. I really do, because it's unique, and all wrestling is a very theatrical thing, right? There's so much performance to it. What prompted you to set the story though in the world of pro wrestling? I'm going to presume you're a pro wrestling fan. Is that correct?
Absolutely. No, I grew up on the product for sure. And then I kind of fell out of it. And then I came back to it right sort of during the Attitude Era when you saw guys like The Rock and Triple H and Stone Cold were really rising up. And but what also happened around that same time was I watched a documentary called Beyond the Mat. And it's a behind the scenes documentary. And it was sort of the beginning of a lot of these documentaries. They're more commonplace now with shows like Dark Side of the Ring on Vice and the Ric Flair 30 for 30 and Andre the Giant HBO documentary. And I was just so fascinated by Jake the Snake Roberts, who I remembered wrestling in like the Pontiac Silverdome in front of 93,000 people. And then Beyond the Mat, he's fallen on hard times and he's wrestling in like a rural barn for like 50 to 100 people. And that fall from grace was just fascinating for me. And so I realized that to do a story with a pro wrestler, you kind of had to embrace the in-ring over the top theatricality, but also the dark underbelly. And that sort of seemed like fertile ground to kind of mine. And then while I was in school and studying and working in screenwriting, I was reading crime novels constantly. And one of my favorite sort of subgenres was the athlete detective. So I've read mysteries about boxer detectives, surfer detectives, sports agent detectives, and nobody had ever really done wrestling before, to the best of my knowledge. And I thought, I know that world. I love that world. And that could be a fun way to sort of do the familiar athlete detective, but maybe hopefully put a new spin on it.
Well, when you do research and think about, certainly you know a lot about wrestling, but did you have an opportunity to go talk to any wrestlers and get any stories that might have been inspirational? Did you ever have that kind of an opportunity?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was very fortunate with Cobra Clutch. Friend of mine is a firefighter and his brother, he works with a guy whose brother or cousin or something was a pro wrestler. And so a local pro wrestler in Vancouver. So I met him. His name is Uncle Daddy Tony Baroni, which is still, for my money, one of my favorite wrestling names. And he was so generous and he shared so much about not just pro wrestling, but also sort of the differences between sort of the polished product you really see on, WWE or AEW, and then sort of more of the indie, smaller local pro wrestling. And that's a little more, that's a little more intense, and that's sort of lacks sort of maybe the same flair. And a lot of these guys, they're working, 9 to 5 jobs, busting their ass, and then they get in their car and they drive downtown and put on their tights and grease themselves up and beat the crap out of themselves for, for little to no money. But they do it because they have such a passion for, the performance art and for the storytelling that comes with professional wrestling. And as a writer, I think I could relate to that. But you get all kinds of funny stories and anecdotes. One of my favorite ones was how there was a guy who was from Vancouver and he was in wrestling in Seattle. And during the match, he took a hit and his front lip split through, or his tooth split through his front lip. And so he had a big gash on his lip. And rather than go to the hospital in Seattle, he drove back to 3 hours to Vancouver because he wanted to take advantage of our healthcare.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So that's so these guys they pay their dues and it's just a fascinating, very passionate world. And I was just such great respect and reverence for what these guys do.
I don't remember when we were at Left Coast Crime in Tucson, if I told you the story about my grandfather, his wrestling incident. Did I tell you that?
You did, yes, I remember, but please refresh my memory.
Well, short version is my older brother is a cop, and he was really young on the force. This had to have been maybe around 1970, somewhere in there. And I came along very late in life. So my grandparents were both born in the 1890s. My grandfather fought in World War One. He went in as a farrier, thinking he was going to be taking care of horses, and instead he ended up in the trenches. And so he had some really significant experiences there, got wounded and that kind of thing. But at that time, one of the big wrestling duos was with these 2 guys called the Von Braun brothers, and they were the Germanic guys, and their manager wore a World War One German helmet and a uniform, but the helmet with the spike on the top. And
Right.
so, and they were the bad guys, right? Of course. And so,
Of course.
I don't remember if they were wrestling Pat Patterson and Rocky Johnson, the Rock's father, in this particular one, but I know they wrestled them a lot. But my brother, knew my grandfather loved to watch wrestling on Saturday afternoons on the three channels, right, that anyone could get at that time. And so he brought him to the Memorial Auditorium in Sacramento, got him a good seat right up front. And because my brother worked security on the side, right? That was a lot of young cops did that. So anyway, match is over. The Von Brauns won, I think, and of course they did all the shenanigans that the bad guys always do. Pull through the ropes and just stuff like that.
Right.
As they're leaving, my grandfather gets up, grabs his folding chair, and smashes the Von Braun's manager over the head with it.
Right.
Needless to say, that was the last time he got to go to the Memorial Auditorium to watch a wrestling match. It was made very clear to my brother, you are not to bring him back here anymore, and we will press charges. But that's how it's. So it's one of the things that I love about the wrestling game, even though I'm not into it very much, but the people that are really into it and they love it, and they know a lot about it, and so I'm really curious. Do you have fans that you run into that are like that either point out flaws or they make story suggestions or whatever that are just as into it as you are?
Absolutely. I remember that story about your grandfather. That was hilarious. And I think I said when we were talking about it, I said, oh man, I would have thought that was part of the show. You would have assumed that was just scripted, because sometimes they'll do that. They'll work in people from the crowd. But
well,
no,
the really hilarious thing is my grandfather is about 5'7", about 140 pounds soaking wet, right? He was a little guy. So I
yeah.
can only imagine what the crowd must have been thinking about that one.
Well, he went for the steel chair, so he looked like a pro.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, like with the local wrestlers, at least in Vancouver, that I got to know, they were just so helpful and so welcoming, and they just shared a lot. And actually, one of the most amazing experiences that I got to do is I got to go to a training session, like a tryout for a local pro wrestling promotion, and that was really something, because it's one thing to go to the shows, even if they're smaller and they're in a community center or at a smaller venue, so nothing like a Coliseum or like what you see sort of on TV or Monday Night Raw. But even then, it was a hole in the wall, industrial building in an industrial row of a strip, and there just wasn't a lot going on. And then it was just bare bones. There was a ring, but there was barely, I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 feet from where the ropes ended and the walls were, because it was just such a contained space. And you watched the local wrestlers, who are also trainers, put these guys through the exercises and the training, and you just see the effort and the passion, and these guys taking the bumps and the hits, and the conditioning and the planning, and just so much of how much goes into it, as this sort of live action stunt show scripted entertainment hybrid. There's just really nothing quite like it. And so there's so many details that I sort of absorbed there. And I definitely, when I went to a lot of these local shows, I went in sponge mode. But I was so fortunate, because just going into these world, I started to make contacts, and I was able to connect with one local wrestler here named Cat Power, who's a fantastic lady wrestler, and she's given me some. So she actually proofread Rolling Thunder, gave me feedback on it, and blurbed the book. And then Jean Hollywood Basson, who was the original Glow Girl from which is the organization that the Netflix show was based on, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. And Jeannie was fantastic, and she's read all the books and consulted and given me feedback, and she's even taken my books to a few wrestling conventions that she goes to and shown them around. So, but that's the wonderful thing about the industry is everybody's just so passionate about it. The love for sports entertainment is so pure, and I hope that when I come kicking around to these things, or I'm asking questions, people seem not to mind taking the time to share some stories or anecdotes, and for me that makes all the difference in the world, because even though these stories are comedic, and like I said, you want to embrace that sort of theatricality, I never want to be laughing at pro wrestling. I want to be laughing with it, and humor is pretty intrinsic to the product overall. And I try to do that with roller derby in book 2, and then mixed martial arts in book 3. So there's moments of levity, of course, that are sort of signature to the series, but I always want to be treating these sports with such respect, because that's ultimately what I identify with the most, is the passion. And when you get into the writing business, as you're doing it because it's inside you and you have to. And I find that people that play get into roller derby or wrestling or mixed martial arts, a lot of that's very much the same case.
I'm going to follow up and ask you about the humor in a second too, but I wanted to ask, there's Five Moves of Doom, which is the latest. As you noted, Hammerhead gets involved in the world of MMA, and I'm curious, one, are you an MMA fan as well? And has the reaction from the folks in MMA been similar to the reaction you've got from people in the wrestling world?
Yes, I am a fan. Not as long time a fan as pro wrestling, and not as knowledgeable. But I definitely did my research of the three books. I actually got fortunate the way that I staggered it. I always knew I wanted to do the MMA book because what I enjoyed in that book was taking a Hammerhead Jed, who's so defined by his physicality, and sort of stripping that away. And what if he's not the big tough guy? So to take away his biggest advantage and explore, he's got nothing left to do but rely on his wits and explore that. But through a friend, I was able to connect with a legendary local British Columbia Canadian fight promoter, Jerry Gianco, and we actually were able to connect. And so I did most of my research kind of because we were all in lockdown at the time. So I did most of my research online. Whereas with roller derby, I got out to the games, and with pro wrestling and indie wrestling, I was definitely out at all the matches. But I was able to sort of watch a lot of the old, school street videos, and the rise of like Kimbo Slice and stuff like that, which was really interesting. But when I met with Jerry, it was fantastic because when you get that kind of validation from somebody that is so entwined with the sport and has so much knowledge, and when they read it and they're like, yes, this is working, we wouldn't do this, that, so they'll give you their feedback and their notes, and you make your tweaks and your changes, and it allows you to hopefully try and infuse sort of an authenticity to it. But I think the one connective tissue between all the books, and when I'm able to get sort of advisors and to kind of offer feedback, is that they can all tell that my heart's really in it, and that I'm really genuine, and I want to do justice to the sport. And then that was always the genesis of the idea, was here's this guy being a pro wrestler PI, such a colorful, crazy world, that in a way he's sort of uniquely suited to go into these sort of subcultures and less than mainstream sports, although mixed martial arts is definitely the most mainstream of the three. And but yeah, having that advantage of knowing that people that have, and I had a roller derby player consult on book two, so just having that kind of feedback from industry professionals is just invaluable.
And as I noted, the humor part of it, I love that any kind of a mystery will have humor to it, at least in spots. I mean, there are some that are meant to be very comedic, but there are others, where it's a flow, and that's what yours is. And I love that. Has that always been your writing style? You know, and I don't want people to think, oh, this is just one yuck a minute kind of a thing, because it's not really that, but
No.
but it really is a big part of how people interact with each other in your stories. And so has that always been the focal point of your writing, or was that something that you had to learn and adapt? How did that come to be for you as a writer?
That's no, that's a good question. I started out writing just screenplays, and I was always trying to write what was selling. So I remember I tried to write some teen sex comedies when American Pie hit, and then Saw was out, and I was trying to write that horror movie gimmick or whatever. And I was I loved action movies. I grew up in action movies and action comics. Shane Black movies were always my favorite, in particular. But I kind of just tried everything. And then I was very fortunate to work with my professor, Leonard Schrader, at Chapman University and the American Film Institute. And then we worked on stuff together. And some of the stuff we worked on were ideas that he had. And so they might have been a little darker, a couple psychological thrillers, not necessarily my wheelhouse, but man, the learning experience of and the mechanics that I think I picked up working with him and just seeing him work was just such a phenomenal experience. But it wasn't until I sort of moved home, put screenwriting on pause. I was focused really much on TV writing. And in particular, I was doing some sitcoms. And then I really sort of got into comedy writing. And I just read everything about, comedy and comedy writing. And just, learned about fundamentals, learn about things like the rule of three, just, the basic things. And then it just started. And then I had the idea for Hammerhead Jed kicking around. I just started percolating. But even then, I didn't really So I started writing the Hammerhead Jed series. This was the first time I wanted to write something just that I wanted to see, that felt like I was, channeling, my favorite movies and action comedies, but also putting a little spin on it. And and then as I got into it, it was so Cobra Clutch was essentially my version of like Mickey Spillane with pro wrestlers and missing snakes in Vancouver. And then writing it, I realized this has to have humor, has to be a part of the series. So then with Rolling Thunder, I definitely leaned into the humor more. So as I revised and worked with my editor and my team at New West Press, my publisher, we definitely made Cobra Clutch more comedic, but there was a lot that was sort of organically there. Rolling Thunder, I went in with the actual mindset. This is a mystery comedy series. And then thank goodness I did, because then with Five Moves of Doom, which is actually sort of probably the grittiest and toughest of the stories, I had to work and really carve out to make sure I ensured that I maintained that signature humor, because it does go into a little bit of a darker place, and we get a bit of a deeper look into, Hammerhead Jed and what makes him tick. But yeah, I definitely did my due diligence, and a lot of studying the craft of comedy, and then just the realization of that, to not address it and to not have humor in there, it would be doing a disservice to pro wrestling,
Right.
in my opinion.
Well, now you've noted you're a screenwriter, and you have a undergraduate degree from Chapman, and then you have a master's degree in screenwriting as well from the American Film Institute. I've had a lot of folks on the show recently that have written for TV or movies. It's a very different form of writing. So take me a little bit into it, and just how did that form of writing and what you learned there impact how you became a novelist and how you write as a novelist as opposed to as a screenwriter?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that would all be my professor. It was funny when Leonard and I were really close. And then when I graduated AFI, we were working and writing things together outside of school. And he, for my graduation, he gave me a graduation present. And I thought he was a big movie memorabilia collector. So I thought maybe it might be something like that. And he gave me 3 like first edition books. And it was like The Monkey's Raincoat by Robert Cray, Jorah Lansdale, Mucho Mojo, and I think The Last Coyote by Michael Connolly. So 2 or 3 of those are pretty amazing mystery comedies. And then he's like, you want to write great characters, read these books. And then I just got so into and I had read crime fiction growing up lots, but I just really zeroed in on mystery comedies, and then quickly found my way to sort of athlete detectives. And then we would just spend hours just talking about these characters and stories and favorite authors. And then when I moved back home after Leonard passed away, and I was back home, I went to Surrey International Writers Conference, and Hallie Efron was there, and she was doing a workshop she's got a fantastic book on how to write a mystery novel. And she was talking about how structurally screenplays and mystery novels are actually quite similar. And Leonard had always said the same thing. He said, one day you might want to just hit pause and take a crack at a crime novel. And I was always hesitant, but I was intrigued by the idea of spending more time with your characters and writing in first person, because coming from screenwriting, that felt very natural to me. And so I did. And then I think the final piece for me was I sort of structured it like a screenplay. I wrote it with a screenplay, but I definitely sort of fleshed out more, as a book. But then Teresa Schwegel, who's a friend, and she was also Leonard was also a mentor of hers, and she won the Edgar Award for a fantastic book, best debut, Officer Down. And I was able to connect with her, and she was generous enough to read my manuscript. And she said, I like what you have going on here. I like the characters. I like the humor. I like the twists. I like the turns. Feels like the story can take place in any city in North America. But because it's not a screenplay and because it's a mystery novel, you need to make it feel like it only take place in Vancouver. And that was a real light bulb moment for me. And then that's when I went back and sort of wrote and infused Vancouver, which is my hometown where I, spent most of my life, into the story. And that sort of was when things really started to come together. Whereas based off my screenwriting experience, I'd write a crime scene and I'd be like, okay, flashing lights, yellow police tape, barrier. And then I just sort of like, okay, let them figure out how to shoot it. You just put in enough visual nuggets to kind of get into your scene. Whereas with the novel, I wanted to create more of that, ambiance and that feeling, and why, Vancouver itself is so sort of essential to this series. And that's the thing I really like to tap into is sort of the long, proud history of professional wrestling in Western Canada. Of course, probably starting most of all with Bret Hart and the Dungeon and the Hart family dynasty in Alberta. But yeah.
Well, I noted that in the intro that you really had a lot of cool swag at the conference where we met, and it's not an insignificant thing because these days, unless you're at the very top of the literary food chain, your name rhymes with Stephen King or something like that, you're going to be responsible for doing a huge percentage, if not all, of your own marketing, right? So tell me a little bit about your marketing philosophy. And I'm taking one more step back from that.
Mhm.
I had never participated in an author speed dating event before. And I only did it as a fan in that regard. I clearly didn't have a book out or anything that I was promoting, but I was really fascinated. For those who are unfamiliar, this was essentially two authors per table that get to, and it rotates around the room, all the fans sitting at whatever tables, but the two authors come to the table. They each have 2 minutes to talk about their books, the current book, whatever book, and then the bells ring, they move on to the next table. You get two more authors to talk about their stuff. So a lot of very fast way to learn about what kinds of books are out there from the writers at this conference, right? I'd never been through that. I've been through speed dating with agents before, but that's a very different thing. Right. And so, but it really impressed upon me, and I can still see off to the left here on my desk a whole bunch of the various swag that I got from authors. And I really started thinking about, the size of the bookmark or the uniqueness of the thing that the author was sharing with the fans, buttons or large postcards. And it really made me think, so much time and effort goes into these kinds of things that are so different from just the writing of the book. The writing of a book is so much. I mean, it's a huge part of it, but it's only a part of the overall branding of an author in this day and age. So that's why I say it's not insignificant that you've got good swag and you know how to market. Long-winded way of saying, tell me a little bit about your marketing philosophy. Do you work with a publicist? Do you sit down and actually have a plan? Do you go a little bit more seat of the pants on it? And what's some of the swag that you've created that you really like the most, that you feel the most proud of?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's interesting. It's not something I ever really thought of being part of the job. And then when I got with my publisher, New West Press, they're a smaller Canadian independent publisher, but man, they're just incredible team to work with, and they have a marketing coordinator. And so I've learned a lot from her. And she's given me a lot of advice and particularly like with social media and stuff. But also, a lot of it's just boots on the ground, trial and error. And I was so fortunate with Cobra Clutch. It was nominated for Best Debut for the Lefties, and that was the year Left Coast Crime was in Vancouver. So I went down there, and it was only one book at the time. And so my marketing at that point was sort of like, okay, well, I guess I'll gear it around, wrestling and snakes, because it's a kidnapped snake story. And so I had like little keychains and some snake stuff or whatever, and I tried it out, whatever. It was fine. It was good. It was a great experience. I mean, I've taken pitching classes before in grad school and stuff. And man, it's like, that's not bad. It's helpful, but there's nothing like just getting right out there and author speed dating. You will learn more in those, 90 minutes than you'll learn in an entire semester. It's really you throw yourself in the deep end of the pool kind of situation. And so I learned from that. And then with my second book, it released 4 weeks after lockdown. And so all of a sudden I'm pivoting and doing everything virtually, and then swag just wasn't a thing. Marketing was all virtual. And so what I started doing, it was like, man, if we come out of this and I'm able to get back out and promote a book, because I was working on a third one at that time, I said, I really want to have some fun. And I feel like I was kind of trying to figure out what I was doing with the first one. And the second one, I wasn't able to do, things that I wanted to do. Like I had things lined up. I was going to go to some roller derby games and promote there and stuff. And so with the third one, I said, okay, if we can get out of this, I'm going to have some fun. And by that point, something that was sort of in the first book is just sort of a little dietary quirk, which was Hammerhead Jed loves banana milkshakes. And then over the 3 books, it sort of expanded. And yes, it's a bit of a obsession of his is banana milkshakes, but there's actually an emotional component in the stories that's sort of slowly revealed as to why they're so important to him. And so I realized, I'm like, you know, his name's Hammerhead Jed. He's a wrestler detective. He breaks wood over his head and he loves banana milkshakes. So and then he's just constantly drawn into these sort of quirky, subcultures. So I just said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on some bananas. And so unfortunately, when you fly from Vancouver to Tucson, you can't bring banana milkshakes for everybody. Not a possibility. So I found some Laffy Taffy, banana Laffy Taffy, which is great because there's a joke in every wrapper. And then I found these little banana stress balls. So my whole pitch swag was I would just introduce the character, talk quickly about the 3 books, and then talk about how he loves pro wrestling and banana milkshakes. And then, I said I couldn't bring milkshakes, but here's some banana taffy. And because they're mysteries comedies, there's a joke on the back. And then we all love crime fiction. Sometimes our heart rate gets a little elevated. Well, here's a little banana squeeze toy, and you just sort of squeeze it to bring your heart rate down or catch your breath when you're reading all that wonderful crime fiction that's out there. And then it just kind of clicked, and people just seemed to really respond to the banana stuff, and it wasn't too hard to pack in my suitcase. And I did it at my book launch. And so last September I did at a local brewery, and my cousin was friends with the owner of a local ice cream shop. And I went to talk to him, and he generously donated me 11 liters of banana ice cream. So I had my lunch, and then I got a couple firefighter buddies of mine, and they were awesome. And so they were back in the kitchen. They were mixing up banana milkshakes by hand the whole time. And so when you came to my book launch, books were for sale. I had some other authors from my publisher were there promoting and selling their books. And then we were doing signings, and there were some giveaways, and then there was some appies, and then banana milkshakes, and then beer for sale, of course, and then banana milkshakes for everybody. And it just became kind of a fun, quirky little gimmick. And then, I mean, obviously it's rooted in my mom loved banana milkshakes, which was something that even after my parents divorced, if I was dropped off after a hockey or lacrosse practice, and if I had a blizzard, or if I had, a peanut butter parfait, if we didn't come home with a small banana milkshake for my mom, there'd be hell to pay. And I guess that just fierce devotion she had to it just stuck in my head. And so I just wanted to give my character a little quirk, and then it just sort of evolved. And then when I made it kind of personal, so it's more than just about taste buds, there's actually emotional component to it. It all kind of came together. And then they actually make for a really good milkshake if you're willing to give them a try. Some people don't like bananas, but Dairy Queen, they're not on the menu anymore, but you can order them off the menu, which is one of the things you learn when you go down a banana milkshake rabbit hole like I have.
That's awesome. And I will tell you, I don't do sweets, but my wife loved the banana taffy that I brought home from you. So
there you go.
Kudos for my wife. And she is a sweet tooth aficionado. So if she gives it a thumbs up, it's high praise.
Nice.
Has that been the most effective marketing tool for you?
It's certainly.
Or do you work with a publicist? I don't think we got to that. Do you work with a
publicist? Yeah, no, sorry. I don't have a publicist. I have an amazing marketing team with New S Press, and they're so helpful. And then I'll schedule, and they're generous with their time too. So I'll schedule Zooms, and I'm like, what do you think about this? So like before I went down to Left Coast Crime, I was batting around ideas, and I was like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I was giving much, and they're like, that's a good one. That's a good one. And then when I co-hosted when you go to Left Coast Crime at the awards banquet, you can co-host a table. And so Iona Wishaw and I, she was nominated for Best Historical, and she's a really good friend. And we were speed dating partners, and we hosted a table together. And she was giving out like lovely advanced reader copies of her new book, and like these beautiful cookies or treats or whatever. And I'm like, well, there's no topping that. And so I was just Googling around and poking around on Amazon, and I'm like, well, I've done the banana squeeze toy, and I've done the banana candy, and I said maybe I've gone back to the well too many times. And then I found banana wine topper, which was perfect. So everybody at our table got a banana wine topper, and you just pull it out of the box, and it's a peeled banana, and you stick it in. It keeps your wine fresh, and yeah, it's definitely been the most fun marketing for me. And if it makes it a little distinctive, great. But I think probably why I've embraced it is that the quirk has grown over the course of the series, and it's actually become important because the banana milkshakes, like they were important between me and my mom, they became Hammerhead Jed's mom has passed away, and that's something that kind of a connection that he has with her is through the banana milkshakes, and it's kind of revealed why, and particularly in Five Moves of Doom. And that I thought was kind of sweet, and it kind of anchors hopefully the character and makes him a little more relatable. And so it's not just about, the sweet tooth for him. It's there's a different layer there for him.
Right. Well, so much of a character gets revealed as time goes on, and gosh, we struggle so much as writers because we want to tell stories in a certain way, and sometimes that means revealing things a little bit slowly or as the process goes on. That isn't always what the large industry wants from us, especially from genre fiction. And really to the extent that I think writers are often caught in a little bit of a catch-22, in that the traditional industry says, as an example, it wants original stories and characters. You see that all the time. Agents, oh, I want something original. I want this, I want that. But then really in practice, what it actually seems like is they still really favor very familiar themes and characters. You've mentioned a few: the rugged former cop turned private eye, the rugged former soldier turned PI, the rugged former special ops soldier turned, operative or revenge monster or what have you. There's even some of those tropes, as you noted, an athlete turned private eye. That's the manuscript that I'm working on, as an athlete turned private eye. There
Nice.
for you. What kind of a reception did you ever try going to trying to do the whole big five, big agent, thing with these stories? Did you know from the beginning that you wanted to stay with a smaller press where you might have more control over the story and how it's told? I mean, what was that process like for you?
Oh yeah, no, I swung for the fences, and I queried everywhere and everybody, and because I mean I felt I was very excited. It was the most exciting character I had ever created, and I was really excited to get it out there, and it felt to me like maybe I was doing something familiar, but also something maybe a little different with a little bit of a twist on it. And then it was just a fun sandbox to play in, and I was always a series guy. Those were always my favorite, mystery, novels were the series. And so that's definitely what I did. So yeah, so I queried everywhere and entered competitions and different things. And, like everything, rejection, was commonplace. And so nothing really hit. And there were a couple, a Pacific Writers Conference had a competition or something, and it didn't make past. It made the quarterfinals, but it didn't make the final round. But I got the judges' scorecard, and it was just something like, I really like this, and this really worked for me, and I encourage you to keep writing. And when you're getting all that rejection, and you get that little diamond in the rough that's like, hey, keep going, you got something here. That's just like gasoline on the fire of motivation. So I definitely exhausted all options. And then by the sort of end of the process, I was focused on Canadian publishers, and particularly I sort of exhausted all options with agents, bigger publishing houses, or ones that would accept. And then I was sort of down to Canadian publishers. And then there was one I always had my eye on, New S Press, which is where I'm at, because part of their mandate, they've been publishing radically rewarding fiction for 40 years, but mystery is one small component of their many genres. But one of the things that their mandate is sort of they're particularly interested in Western Canadian stories by Western Canadian authors. And I'm like, well, there's nothing more Western Canadian. They're based in Edmonton, and the Hart family dynasties in Calgary. And I was like, well, maybe they'll get it, what I'm trying to do here. And I submitted there, and then right at the same time, the book was made the long list for the Crime Writers of Canada Best First Unpublished Novel, which was super exciting. And then before, like a week later, New West Press reached out and offered a contract to publish Cobra Clutch. So that was a no-brainer, and I went there, and I withdrew from the competition. And I didn't know. I mean, you just take what's on the table, and I had no idea how wonderful the experience and the team would be there. And it's just been absolutely by far the most rewarding experience, of my professional career. And they've just been so unbelievably supportive, because it was more about feeling understood. Of course, like, we were going to publish this, whatever. I mean, that's just a thrill. It's like one of the greatest days of your life. It's a dream coming true. But but it was extra exciting because I'm like, they get what I'm trying to do here. Like they get that I'm trying to, you know, pay respect to Western Canadian pro wrestling, and I'm trying to have fun, and I'm trying to acknowledge the business, but also, you know, like my editor's like, okay, we got some Mickey Spillane, we got this, we got that. Like they saw everything that I was trying to do. So everything I wanted a reader to experience and sort of take away from my book, they got it on all those levels. And so it just felt like we just really clicked. And then yeah, now we're 3 books in, and it's just been absolutely fantastic.
Well, thanks for sharing that too, because I think that's one of the things that um, I hope every writer goes into a project knowing what they want. That's one of the things I often tell writers is you need to know what you want out of this, right? And what is your plan? I mean, if the only thing that will ever make you happy is to get a deal with Random House through a big agent and on, okay, great, that's fine. But if that's the only thing that will make you happy, and we all know how hard that is, well,
Mhm.
this may be an unsatisfying attempt for you, right? So you just
Right.
sometimes need to also be aware of what all of the options are and be open to the idea that you may end up having a much better experience like the way you have with New West than you maybe
Absolutely.
would ever have thought you would, because you weren't open to that. You have to be open to what all the possibilities are. So that's a great story, and I really hope people that are watching this are paying attention, to that possibility. That said, let me real quick follow up. What's been the biggest pro and con of being with a small press like this? Have there been any cons? I mean, it certainly sounds like you've had some pros.
Oh, I really can't say any cons. I mean, they've just been so unbelievable. I can list many pros. One of them being, I feel like because I came into it from screenwriting, I had like no frame of reference for really the publishing industry, or, other than just being a crime fiction fan. And so kind of getting to see how they work and watch how, they, market and present blurbs, and how they, write the synopsis on the back cover, and things like that, and just sort of seeing it and just sort of absorbing it, and then seeing the other books that they're publishing. That's been really eye-opening. And then like rolling. I mean, if a pro wrestler looking for a missing snake is a tough sell, I double down and I'm like, okay, we got a missing roller derby coach, which is probably more of a obscure fringe sport, but that was what was I wanted to write. I wanted to write that was what my heart was into, and the idea was always for this character to go and because as an author, I get to go and discover these things that I've seen or caught my eye, but I've never really done like research enough, or I don't know enough about like roller derby or mixed martial arts, so it's an excuse for me to go into it. And they never discouraged me at all. They're like, yeah, hey, what are you working on next? They're like, yeah, go for it. And it was like, so it was very liberating to be able to sort of be like, this is where I want to take the character, and this is the venue or the backdrop or the window dressing that I want to use for this one. And I, just to add on what you were saying, I have to say timing's a huge part of, catching your break. I mean, I think you just have to be hungry and resilient, and write what's in your heart. And then but then timing. My GM at my publisher, he was at the time, he was the first reader on Cobra Clutch, and it was a longer submission to hearing back. So the querying process was longer because they're smaller. And during that time, from when I first submitted to when the book was greenlit, he had become general manager, and he remembered my book, and he went back and he's like, when he called me to give me the wonderful news, he said, one of the things that's kind of fun for me is this is actually one of the first books I'm greenlighting as the GM. And I was like, well, lucky me. But again, he grew up watching wrestling with his brother, and he was an Alberta boy, and he totally understood what I was trying to do, and that was just such an exciting feeling. Getting your work out there is phenomenal, but also feeling understood and feeling like people get what you're trying to do. That's equally exciting for me.
Yeah, it's a really good point to be made. I really do hope everybody absorbs that, that is part of the overall experience that you may not get at one of the big places. It really is something. And if it's important to you, again, mind open. Keep your mind open. One thing I
Definitely.
want to add too, and it's actually in the form of a question: how much control do you have on the cover selection? Because I, look, one of the things I notice when you go to any whether it's a bookstore or whether it's a conference or whatever, you see all these books laid out. There are some books with great covers. The covers on all three of your books are great. They're
Oh, thank you.
eye-catching. The colors are vibrant. The imagery fits with those covers. I mean, they draw you to the book, right? It makes my heart hurt when I see a book. Maybe it's small press, maybe it's just even indie published, and the cover is lame. It's the cover just is blah. It doesn't pull you in. And I just think that's so critical in this day and age. You've got to catch people's eye because you are one bit of wheat in a giant wheat field.
Right.
Do you have input on your covers at all?
Yes, I mean I do. I mean I can only speak to my experience with New S Press, but they're fantastic. They actually encourage and will ask their authors, do you have any ideas? What are you thinking? And the thing is, when you work with it, like they're small, but they are just pros, and it very quickly becomes evident these guys know exactly what they're doing. They are, putting out phenomenal books. They might only put out 10 to 12 a year, but man, like the books that come out are just really something. So it's just such an exciting time to be with them, and it's just an honor to be with such a great publisher. But yeah, but like with Cobra Clutch, like, do you have any ideas? I'm like, well, I'm like, maybe like a wrestling move, and like I kind of see yellow because banana milkshakes, and then maybe like a snake. I think that was the extent of it. and then they put in but they had reached out to this guy Michel Vrana, who's done just so many amazing book covers. He's actually done a whole bunch for Kathy Reichs. This is the Bones, the TV series Bones is based off of, and so they brought him in, and he just had a vision. And what I love about the first one, the yellow one, is it's kind of got sort of a pulp fiction-y feel to it. And then with the second one for Rolling Thunder, like, any ideas? I'm like, well, it's women's flat track roller derby, and I said it's such a fiercely proud sport about these empowered female empowerment, these women warriors. And I said, so I just see like magenta or hot pink or something, and like roller skating, and they're like, okay, let's just, and then they come back with it. I don't even think there were multiple like sometimes there'll be a couple different versions. I think there was just one for Rolling Thunder, and everybody was just like, oh yeah, that's it. And then Five Moves of Doom, I think I might have suggested blue, and then I think I threw in the skull because I like the ominous feeling of it. And then as you get into the sort of the Fight Club story, there's backstory there with like the antagonists and stuff. And then of course they came up with the like the silhouettes and the Superman punch that the guy's doing. And but it's one of those things where I'm honored and flattered that they ask my 2 cents, because I mean, what do I know? I just know, like, I write the story and I have an idea and I just kind of throw it out there. But I also, by the same token, I completely trust in what they're doing. I'm like, these guys know what they're doing. They publish books all the time, and so they'll come back and be like, what about this? So it's been a really nice dovetailing of sort of like, it's every time for me it's been beyond my wildest dreams, and so I get super excited. And then I like to think that maybe with some color suggestions or whatever my 2 cents is, perhaps that helps as well. But it's always the best when you're in great hands. It's very easy to relax and just sort of be like, yeah, I don't know, I'm thinking a little of this, a little of that, and then just and then not do the heavy lifting. So it's a pretty sweet deal.
Well, I really do admire how the books have come out. They look, like I said, they really do look good, and it's
Oh,
such
thank
an
you.
important thing. I'm really appreciative of you coming on today and talking about a lot of these things. We didn't get into some of the things that I ask a lot of writers, like, oh, what's your writing process? And, do you write X number of words per day? And all those things are very important. But I know I haven't often talked with writers at this detail about things like this. But I think it is so important in this day and age for writers to understand that this is a product. It's a product of your heart and your soul, and all that stuff is very real. But once it becomes a commercial product, you have to be thinking about how do you maximize what our my friend Neil Plaxey, who will be on the show here very shortly, next week or two. He calls being discoverable. You have to put a lot of effort into being discoverable. Writing a great book means nothing if nobody ever even sees it and gets the opportunity to discover it. So you have to be
Right.
discoverable. And you've really done a great job of put not just by going and appearing at the conferences, which is great, but also um, finding a way to stand out a little bit. I didn't even mention your
Right.
wardrobe at the conference, which is
Yeah.
always you. We always knew where AJ Devlin was in a crowd.
That's
That
right.
was great. I just think, but it's so much fun. You bring
It
a
is.
level of fun and positivity and joy. Not to sound like Marie Kondo here, but you really do bring a sense of joy to what you're doing. And that kind of thing is so infectious and is so welcome in a world. And I mean, let's be real about the world we live in. And the industry is so hard, and there's so much negativity and so much rejection, and
Right.
all the things that just make you feel like I don't ever want to do this again thing.
Right. Of course.
And
Yeah.
then you seem to find such joy in it and resilience and as a fan, I find that to be something I really appreciate. So kudos, my
Oh,
friend. You are doing a great job here. Really appreciate
thank
that.
you. I mean, it's I grew up on action comedies and escapist entertainment. That's all I really ever wanted to do. And then it became really easy really quick because, wrestlers and wrestling is often so defined by having a gimmick. So I was like, well, why should I be any different? And so, we got the the indie wrestling snake book, we got the roller derby book, we got the mixed martial arts book. And what's the gimmick? What's the vehicle this time? But the thing I've been most fortunate about is people are so unbelievably generous, and don't be afraid to ask. Like, that's what I've learned is if you know somebody knows always knows somebody. If you know somebody who knows a wrestler, a roller derby player, a mixed martial arts or a fight promoter, just ask. It's like, hey, could I ask you some questions? Could I pick your brain? And just being around it, because people are so generous and often love to share stories, and you will get details from these people. And that to me is the best feeling in the world when I get an email from a lady in the Czech Republic who has a literary blog, and she was a roller derby star. She'd come across Rolling Thunder, and then she asked me to do a guest blog post or whatever. And she's like, oh yeah, I loved how you got the roller derby details right. And I didn't get them right. My friend, who was a roller derby player from high school, got them right. And it's something as simple as shorthand. Nobody in roller derby calls roller derby. They don't call it roller derby. They don't call it the derby. They just say derby. So like back in derby, or the thing about derby is, and it's a tiny, tiny little detail, but I used it, and it hopefully adds an authenticity to the work. And then it shows that respect to the worlds in which I'm trying to go.
Yeah, that really is a key thing too. The panel that I moderated at Left Coast this year, one of our authors, we were talking about representing the city, and having the setting be almost like a character, right? Which is not a new thing, but
Right.
he's from New Orleans, and he brought up the point of, it drives him crazy when he reads books that are set in New Orleans and they use vernacular that nobody in New Orleans uses. And
Right.
and
Right.
and he mentioned some of the things that are very particular to New Orleanians, like, you don't go buy food at the store, you make groceries. And he always knows when he's reading a real New Orleanian, because they use terms like that. So yes, it's those
Right.
little details are so important, and especially when you're talking about something that has a fan base already, like wrestling or MMA or roller derby,
Right.
and they're going to spot those mistakes,
Of
or
course.
or they're going to spot the things that give it the authenticity. So that those are real key things for people to remember here too, as you write your stories. I always like to end on something that's fun. I hope it's fun. I mean for it to be fun. I'm going to give you an option. Three people. You can choose any one of these three people to hang out with, go to a wrestling match with, have dinner, share a banana milkshake, what have you. But you can only choose one of the three. And I think you'll catch that there's a little bit of a connection, at least between two of them here. So the options I'm going to give you:
Yeah.
the great wrestler Killer Kowalski, uh, the actor Mickey Rourke,
Ooh.
or the blonde bomber herself, Joan Weston, the great roller derby queen, Joan Weston. You can pick one of those three to hang out with and chat up for a little bit. Who are you going to pick and why?
That's actually a tough question. Man, I think I'd have to probably go with Kowalski, just because he is a pro wrestler PI. He wrestles in all the books. As much as I'd love to talk roller derby or to do other things, the wrestling is always going to be part of the series. And then I love I just love old school wrestling. Like, I mean, I'm a fan, like I'm talking like Bruno Sammartino and like the Madison Square Garden. And so like, Kowalski or, Gene Kaninsky, like there's so many, legends and Stu Hart in the dungeon. Like, so the stories you would hear back then in those days, before there was NXT, before there was, reality shows tough enough about becoming the next star. Like I'm talking like you're in the dungeons, you're in the basement, you're training, that it's no frills, there's no payoff, there's no glamour to it. It's just, it's just really bare bones, Rocky Balboa style, punching the meat training. I would have to pick Kowalski's brain just to be like, hear all those stories, and that would just fascinate me endlessly for sure.
I have to admit, I'm a little surprised that the Mickey Rourke option wasn't there. I assume you've seen The Wrestler.
I love The Wrestler, but I mean, he has such an amazing body of work. I don't know if I'd keep it to wrestling. I think I'm thinking it'd be better for my career if I had that opportunity to talk to Kowalski. But yeah, no, I could talk about Mickey Rourke. Man,
Understood.
of course, I would love to talk about that movie, but then I'd want to talk about everything right down to Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man. So not even one of his biggest hits necessarily, but
Right.
he's such an icon.
Right.
Yeah, but for the sake of the series, I would have to go with Kowalski.
There you go. Well, AJ Devlin, thank you so much for coming on the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you again and to hear more about the great series. The one thing I didn't ask, and just really quickly, are we going to see more of the Hammerhead books, or have you wrapped this up and are you getting ready to move towards something else?
Hammerhead is returning. Hammerhead will be coming back in book 4, and I'm working on book 5. So the plan is to keep the series going. I did kind of view these first 3 books as a trilogy. The first book and the third book encapsulate his entire first year as a amateur PI turned full-fledged PI. So that was kind of nice to kind of tell those 3 stories in that first year. But now I'm on to sort of different stories and new challenges for him. So I'm having a lot of fun, like I said, in that sandbox. So I'm not planning on leaving it anytime soon.
Well, the great Dave Stewart, former great pitcher for the Oakland A's, said the best advice he ever got in his life when he was struggling really hard, and before he found his groove with the A's, he'd been through the Dodgers and the Rangers and Phillies, and thought maybe it might be time to hang him up. And he got some advice from Dusty Baker, who's currently the manager of the defending world champion Houston Astros, who told him, "Don't ever give up your uniform. Make them take it from you." Right? So if you got something good that's going, man, if you're still capable, don't give it up, man. Don't give it up for free. Make them take it from you. So
there you go.
There you go.
That's good advice.
AJ, again, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun. I feel like hopefully folks out there will really glean something, not just from your experiences, but from your attitude about all of this. I really do think it's such a key part to having literary success, whatever that looks like for each individual person. And you're clearly having a lot of fun and doing well. I look forward to reading more of the books. And so on that happy note, I'll say thank you again for coming. Look forward to seeing you again at future conferences somewhere down the line. And for all of those of you out there, if you liked this presentation, and I really hope you did, please hit subscribe. And if you have the time and the inclination, please go leave me a nice 5-star review so other folks can more easily find the show, be it on YouTube or whatever podcast catcher platform that you prefer. I'm on all the big ones, so please. And also, I'm going to steal something I heard from another podcaster I really like. If you like this, tell a friend. That is the best way for people actually to find the show more than anything. Tell somebody, say, hey, you know what? I heard this really great Canadian author who writes these crazy ass wrestling PI books. It was a lot of fun. He was a cool guy. You got to check out that show. You might learn something. Do that for me, okay? And then we'll all be happy.
Well, thank you so much, Rich. This was absolutely a blast. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Appreciate that very much too, AJ. So on behalf of my guest today, AJ Devlin, myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. The very last thing I'll leave you with is the same thing I leave you with every week. Tomorrow, it is not promised to any of us, so please make today count. Until next time, this has been the Open Mic.